Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the opening session of our inaugural Washington and Jefferson College Symposium on Democracy. I want to just say a word about the program this evening and the program ahead of us this week, and then turn things over to the people that actually have something important to say. I do want to say that I believe that what we're about in our conversations about democracy are the very things that the founders of this college and the founders of our nation expected of us. I believe that at the time this college was founded, back just weeks after Cornwallis surrendered to George Washington, bringing about the end of hostilities in the Revolutionary War, that at that very moment, people were already imagining what an independent nation would need to prosper and to succeed and be sustainable long term. And our founders were great students of history. We know that they had looked at experiments with democracy all the way back to the Greek city-states, to the Roman Republic, and they understood that democracy is a fragile thing, that we have had far more experiments with democracy in the world that have failed than have succeeded. And in fact, that continues to be the case today. And so, a theme for this week, and perhaps for all of our future conversations that we have at our future symposium on democracy, is really looking at the fragility of this democratic system that we all benefit from and that we all share responsibility for. You know, I was rereading recently George Washington's farewell address, and Washington is very prescient. He's thinking ahead about challenges to come. He's actually thinking about us. He's imagining generations hence how challenging it will be as time marches on and as society changes to sustain the republic that was framed by our Constitution. He understood that it would be no small thing for us as citizens to continue to nurture and sustain the democratic system that we have today. And it was Ben Franklin, and also a friend of our college, who at the time the Constitution was written, left that meeting and said to the people outside waiting to hear the news, "We have given you a republic if you can keep it." Franklin understood that it is no small thing to keep a functioning and vibrant republic alive. And so I believe that in our own small way, we at Washington and Jefferson College carry forth that vision of our founders to keep the conversation alive about what it takes for our democratic system to continue to evolve with the times and to stay strong and to live out the ideals upon which we were founded and that are articulated so beautifully in our national creed, the Declaration of Independence. And so over the course of this week, we'll be looking at this question of the state of democracy, both in the United States and abroad, and we'll be thinking about just how vulnerable democratic systems actually are, and particularly some of the challenges that we face here in the United States today. And we'll be looking at that through multiple perspectives. And so tomorrow evening, we'll have an opportunity to hear from Steve Young. Steve is the Global Executive Director of the Co-Roundtable. That is an organization founded about 25 years ago by business leaders and government leaders from across the planet upon a set of principles for what they have came to call moral capitalism. And the notion there was that it's important for actors in the economy to behave in moral ways in order to sustain a functioning global economy, but also understanding that democratic institutions actually depend upon a democratic and participatory economy. And so Steve will be talking to us tomorrow evening about what he sees as a danger to our democratic system as we see more economic inequality in the United States and the loss or the decline of the middle class. That should be an interesting conversation, not only for those of you interested in economics, but I think just the larger question of what is the relationship between the well-being of a citizenry and the ability of all of us to participate equally in a system that requires that. And then the next evening, we'll hear from our special keynote speaker, Richard Carmody. Richard is the recently retired president of Corpus Christi College at the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom. He is a world-renowned historian has written a number of books on Abraham Lincoln, and his focus is American history, particularly the period between the founding and the Civil War. And Richard will be talking with us about what he sees as the challenges that we faced in the early days as we tried to get our republic established, and particularly what kind of a challenge the issue of slavery was for our founders, and then during that period leading up to the Civil War, where we finally had to come to a political resolution of that problem that was never resolved at the time of our founding. So that should be an interesting opportunity to learn from a really noted historian. We'll be awarding him an honorary doctorate that evening, so it should be a very special occasion for the college indeed. And then the following day, Richard will be here in the ballroom. By the way, that will be over at Olin. He'll be here in the ballroom, and he will be speaking to us about his brand new book, Abraham Lincoln's Humor. And I think you'll enjoy that. It's kind of a lunch and learn time, so come at lunchtime, grab some lunch and bring it in. And I think all of us who know much about Abraham Lincoln know that he used humor very effectively as a way of defusing difficult situations or illustrating things that he wanted people to listen to, that perhaps humor would open the door for them to hear. And then tomorrow, that evening, Thursday evening, we'll have a panel discussion where members of our faculty and staff will join Richard on the stage here in this room. We'll have some conversation that evening about Washington and Jefferson, the men. What do we think in the 21st century about those men for whom our college is named? How do we think about their legacy today, what we owe them as people who gave us our republic, who gave us our national values, and yet who, in their own ways, failed to live out the aspirations that they established for all of us, particularly with regard to issues of equality. So I think that should be a very lively discussion, chance for us to turn the focus a little bit more on ourselves and the name that we claim proudly for our college in a way that employs some good critical thinking.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Justin Dangoy, and I am the Director of Community Engagement here at the college within our Division of Student Life. And I have the pleasure tonight to administer the panel here of our wonderful students. And I had a chance to sit down with many of them last week to kind of talk about some of the things that we'd be addressing today. And I think you'll find that they are doing exceptional things and learning exceptional things. And I'm excited to talk with them and you all about some of the things that they've been learning and seeking out through democracy. You will be hearing very limited from me. I'm going to introduce you to our students and then ask them to kind of prepared questions, but then we'd really like to open it up to our audience here. So we'll start with introductions of the students, and they can tell us just a little bit about themselves as well as their Magellan projects. So these, most of our content tonight is going to be centered around their Magellan projects. So I will allow them to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Jordan Osfeld. I am a third-year senior at Washington and Jefferson. I'm a major in chemistry with a minor in Spanish, and I did a Magellan project this past summer, but the summer before in Spain, about the reaction of people to radical Islamic terrorism and how it affected the way they were open to Muslims and whatnot.
Hello, I'm Keith Meyer. I'm a junior here in college. I'm a history major and a business administration major. And my project was this past summer, and I went to the United Kingdom and studied the foreign reaction to the election of our current president, President Trump.
My name is Katie Frinke. I'm also a junior. I'm a history and English major. This past summer, I did my second Magellan, and I focused my studies in PC and Germany, and focused on the comparison of how the U.S. remembers slavery and how Germany remembers the Holocaust.
Hi, my name is Harley Moyer. I'm a junior here from Akron, Ohio. I'm a history major with French and philosophy minors and a concentration in American studies. My Magellan was in the Netherlands 2 years ago, and it was about the impact of international law in The Hague, the city in the Netherlands. And I was studying how the historical context around the city as it grew from the Middle Ages to now, and what aspects of that led to its blossoming and how it exists now as an international beacon for international law.
Hi, my name is Carmen Carroll. Sorry, excuse me. I'm a junior here at the college. I am Communication Arts and Spanish double major with a concentration in American Studies. And I actually went twice to Kenya last year and the year before that, but I'll be focusing on my first Magellan to Kenya. I studied women's education, so the basis of my research was that boys and girls, they both go to school at higher rates. In fact, girls go to school at a higher rate than boys in Kenya, but there's a disconnect when it comes to the working world. So I tried to figure out what was that disconnect. Was it culture? Was it lack of opportunities and things like that?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jonathan Weiss, and I'm a junior. I'm a political science major and a French minor. I completed my Magellan project in the summer of 2016, and it was mainly focused on the Middle East refugee crisis and its effect on Britain in light of the recent Brexit votes that had occurred in June of 2016.
Hello, my name is Abby Peace. I'm also a junior here at the college, and in summer of 2017, I traveled to Israel to study American impact there, culturally and economically.
So our first question, in your conversations with the citizens of the countries that you visited as part of your Magellan, what were the various perspectives on the United States as it relates to our democracy?
I thought something that was really interesting about Spanish culture was that I'm really not that educated on other European countries, but the two-party system was a very strange thing to a lot of people. They have multiple parties, and they have a lot of, I guess, like location allegiance to certain candidates within certain parties. So I just thought that was really strange that there wasn't that just harsh divide between two parties.
Being in England and talking to people about the recent election of President Trump, I know a lot of mixed reviews about the United States, just like based on what happened and their actual opinions. The staying in the hostel is like a very broad idea from people from all over the world. And I have to say, just being there really put in perspective how much the United States actually has an effect on the global community and how much our decisions are actually watched all over the world. And I felt that that's very different from the way that we do here. So if you would ask someone in the United States about a different country, I feel like most people couldn't tell you about the political system. If you ask someone in England or someone from a different country, they seem to know everything, which I found was very interesting.
Yeah, just to agree with Kaden, I didn't realize again how much influence the United States had over some other countries, including their elections. In my time in Germany, just focusing on how Germany also recovered from Nazism and National Socialist Party, and just how that affects their current elections still, how they deal with politics, and how they view our current election with President Trump and some of their concerns with that. I didn't have any very uncomfortable conversations about President Trump, and actually, again, what Katie said, meeting people in hostels from other countries besides Germany was also eye-opening because they usually ask questions about what it's like in the U.S., why do we only have two parties, how did Trump get elected, what does this mean for the rest of the world, should I be worried? So, agree with Katie.
I thought it was interesting to see how America participated in international law because it's kind of a very unique stance that we have, especially compared to other countries in the United Nations and other international groups. I noticed that there's a lot of similarities in the use of law in its context, and there are lots of courtroom proceedings that are very similar to what goes on here. There are organizations that do the exact same types of things, just on a larger scale. And time and time again, I saw similarities like that, but at the same time, we see a very big difference because international law is very participatory. It's hard to make it binding, and I noticed with the International Criminal Court in particular, the United States really doesn't take a role in it because kind of a just a need or want to stay removed from any like chance of backlash, I suppose, in terms of in case someone wants to prosecute a United States citizen, or in terms of backlash for any of the actions that the United States members would take in it. So it's kind of interesting to see that in a lens that I really didn't even imagine I'd be thinking about.
So I had a very similar experience to Jordan's time in Spain. While I was in Kenya, I kind of got to see how the time kind of connected. So the first time that I went, they were kind of thinking about the elections, because their election was a year after ours. So there's a lot of tribalism in Kenya, and they are very devoted to whichever tribe that the candidate is affiliated with. So that was one thing that was completely different from our democracy. And the second time that I went in, it was about a week before elections, right before I left. When I landed, I figured out who the president was going to be in Kenya. And a lot of people, as you saw in Dr. Helen Meakley's slide, a lot of people thought that the elections were hacked. And so people went into the streets, they protested, and they actually did they re-elected again. And it was the same president, but they re-elected again. And there was a big uproar about it. They even the government tried to shut down all forms of social media, and that was just a parallel to the democracies here. Like, it might be a conversation now that we're talking about technological advances, but that wouldn't even be a thought here, turning off our social media sites and kind of giving up our right of speech. So that was one interesting thing that I saw, was the different forms of tribalism through their government, and how something that's cultural kind of integrates in something that's politics.
Just to reiterate Caden's point, my experience was very similar in Britain as well, and seeing the role the United States plays in Britain and also on the world scene carries very heavy dividends in the world, and something we as Americans do not fully understand. We kind of live in our own areas, our own bubbles, and but I think all members of the panel can agree that once we got out of our niches and we experienced living in another nation, we saw just how important and how special democracy is in the United States.
I also had similar experiences like Caden and Jonathan. I found that people who were in support of the Prime Minister were in support of Donald Trump, and they were very open about their opinions and comfortable about talking about it. But those who opposed Benjamin Netanyahu, and therefore Donald Trump, didn't really want to talk to me when we were out in public. A lot of people that I got to talk to were college students that were going on the tours around the country with me. So I got to hear perspectives from students that were my age, and if they were against it, they always pulled me off to the side. They were never willing to talk about it in a group because it's very controversial and strange for them to talk about. And then also what Carmen was just saying about how the government shut down social media. In January, I got to go to Gambia, where they just had a re-election of the president. And last year, when Jammeh, the former president, was not re-elected, he kind of did the same thing. He had a government shutdown, and for 22 days said he wasn't going to step down from democracy. So it's cool I've gotten to see democracy in a more developed country that not a lot of people in America get to go to, and a developing country that most Americans don't get to go to.
Thank you. Our other question is about in relating to your experiences with your Magellan projects. What do you think is the future of democracy in the United States and in our world?
Looking ahead, I think it's important for the younger generation to pay attention to the news, be aware of politics, read history, understand that history does repeat itself. And if we just understand the basics in that sense, I think we can continue to have a stable civil society. Having a stable civil society is essential to maintaining a strong democracy. So if I could speculate for the future, it is that understand history, stick to your roots, and be well informed.
I agree with him. I don't think the overall processes and functions of the democracy in the United States is going to change, but in the future I could definitely see some sort of changes to our political party system, to our electoral system, but I don't think that all the fundamental rights that so many different groups have fought for are going to change.
Honestly, I'm fearful for our democracy in the future. Just from past elections, this election, and the protests that we've gone over, I feel like this kind of decade has been a very heated one, a very, we call it polarized one as well. So I think, like someone said before, I forget, it's definitely going to change. I feel like something drastic is going to have to change, especially listening to the professors speak about technology. I mean, even that's changing our democracy in itself, figuring out what's a real election, what's a fake election. So I'm fearful.
Speaking in the scope of my Magellan experience, I realized just how small the world is, and that there's a lot of different nations with a lot of different interests, but because of how technology has advanced and continues to advance, there's definitely a need to involve everyone and achieve some way for as many nations as possible to aim towards singular goals as much as possible. I know it's a difficult subject, but I think that's what needs to be done, at least from what I saw in my Magellan. And when I said that it's a participatory system with the international law in The Hague, I really meant that. I think especially at the international level, it's very difficult to get anyone to take part in any worldly systems if they don't want to, and I think a lot of problems can be caused just by very small situations of different types. So I think it's a very complex issue, and I think the conversation needs to keep continuing, but that's at least what I've seen throughout my Magellan.
Kind of going a little bit off of what Harley said, but to kind of bring it back to here in the United States, I think it's important to realize that, again, like, it's a polarizing time here in the U.S., but it's also a time where the U.S. needs to understand how much influence we have globally on developing nations and already developed nations, and understand what our global responsibility is in protecting our democracy, what kind of standards we set. And then going back to a global perspective in the UN, again, with participatory governments, the U.S. also needs to understand that our power is currently shifting. We see that in the UN when he is the only one who abstains from voting or stands up for a certain vote. We see that the U.S. doesn't have the leadership or the weight anymore in the UN and the international community. There's other countries that are stepping up and taking the precedent over the United States. So I think it's important that as U.S. citizens that we realize where we stand in the international community, what our influence is, and what that responsibility means here locally.
Yeah, I think just piggybacking off Katie and Harley, my Magellan really did open my eyes to how much we affect other countries. And also just the whole idea that I think in America we seem to place ourselves as the model for democracy, and we seem to think that everyone looks upon us in that way. And I would say being abroad that is true to some extent, but we also place ourselves on a sort of pedestal. There's a lot of other systems that are successful in ways that our democracy might falter in some ways. So as far as where I see democracy going in the future, I don't think I can give like a definitive answer to that, because it's a question I got maybe 2 days ago. But I do think that as far as our democracy changes and our technological advances, I think that we do have to develop our democracy to those. I don't think we can stick to all of our traditions. I think we have to be open to change. I think that a lot of people are going to have to be willing to accept things that they might not be used to.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the idea of change. There are so many people that are so devoted to their party, and I foresee that, there have been multiple political realignments just in the short history of the United States. It's just about time for another one to happen. So that's sort of where I foresee changes happening in our democracy, the political parties. I don't think that we're going to stray from a two-party system anytime soon, but we're going to shake things up a little bit probably.
We'll open it up for questions from you all.
So all of you sort of touched on the fact that it seems as though people in foreign countries have a much higher interest in what's happening in America than Americans have in what's happening in foreign countries. So what are your thoughts on how we can change that, or how to get Americans more interested?
Honestly, I think Americans, or just people who live in the United States, only care about the outside world if they think it's going to affect them. So once we get people thinking like, this little country is going to affect you, the way we import to them, or the fact that they can't get shipments over us is going to affect you. So until people start realizing that what the outside world, outside of our borders matters, people won't notice that it matters to them.
I think that that's a really tough question. I think that any people, they feel interested in something that's foreign to them. So I would guarantee that a lot of Americans know more about like the British royal family than they do about the workings of the American government. And I know that a lot of people feel that they don't want to get involved because they don't have a voice per se. So maybe finding some way to make people feel more heard within the American government would be a way, but I don't have any solutions for that, so.
I agree with what you said about people feeling that they don't have a voice, because what I noticed, and again, it's only a small sample size, but in the Netherlands, everyone seems very personally invested in their country and their politics, and then the politics of Europe. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's only so many people in that country, and it takes 6-8 hours to drive from tip to tip of the country. And I mean, here, it's hard for someone from Oklahoma City to care about, something that goes on in California, let alone something that goes on in the entire nation or the entire world. So I think that's an interesting question. It seems like it's a problem that's not unique, but very close to the United States.
Yeah, kind of going off of what Harley said here, just being in Germany, it's a big country, but it's nowhere near the size of the United States. So people there do have similar frustrations where they're not happy with the candidate's choice, but they understand that their voice is important because they have a very limited amount of space to work in. They can drive across the country and see the different local economies or local elections and how they're affected, whereas it's much harder to do here in the United States. But I think something that was definitely eye-opening was that, even when I went to England, understanding that they're not always happy with their candidates either. In Germany, not everyone was happy that Merkel won, but that was the best choice of the time. So I think that's another issue here in the United States, is not only do we not feel we have a voice, we also think that we're not happy with our choices. So I think a lot of people opt out from even participating because they're not happy with the choices they have, which is a global issue, not just here in the United States.
Just hearing your question, I think back to the 2 conversations I had while I was in England. One was with a girl our age from Scotland, and another was with an Australian who is a teacher and was traveling with his buddies. But we were in the hospital and they were talking to us about how, like I said, how much the United States truly has an effect on their economy. So if you were to start on both their economies, I mean, it's different conversations, but the basis and the theme was that if you were to stop trading with them, it would be catastrophic. Like their countries would basically fall apart. But if they were to stop trading with us, it wouldn't be as much as a problem. I mean, we'd suffer losses, but it wouldn't be as catastrophic, it wouldn't be as big. So I think that, I don't know how to answer how to get other people interested in other cultures. I feel like really traveling is the best way to do it, but that's not an opportunity for everyone. But also, going on that, I also think it's the location. As being in Europe, you drive, you can take the channel from England to France, and it takes like 2-3 hours. It's like going to like West Virginia. So like, I mean like here we go from Pennsylvania, wherever you're from, like West Virginia. Some people might think it's a different culture, but it's still America. But traveling from England to France, or from like France to the Netherlands, like that's a whole different country, that's a whole different foundation. So I think it's also the accessibility.
In order to help Americans better understand other cultures, I think it starts young. I think if parents can encourage their young elementary school students to learn about other cultures, to read as much as they can at such a young age, it'll help shape and mold their minds as they're going through middle school and high school and eventually college. And if more and more parents take on that trend of teaching and opening up their young toddler's mind, it'll help them grow to exceedingly high levels. And then over time, this appreciation for other cultures will grow rather than having like an experience like we have, where we just drop us into another country and we're like, wow. Whereas we can be building up to this throughout our toddler and adolescent years, I think it would be better for our democracy.
I think W&J does a great job of providing opportunities for students to branch out and explore different parts of the world. And I think all of us experience some sort of, like, not traumatic effect, but I know there was a terrorist attack when I was in Israel. Caden was right by the London Bridge. So we all experienced something and we all came back and we're okay, and now we can share our experiences with the world and help other people develop. So I think if more people are getting experiences like that, we'll just continue to spread the knowledge and growth.
Yeah, I think, Jonathan, you make a really good point about education, because usually you think that's maybe like a road answer to something like this, but it really isn't. I mean, I was just sitting up here thinking about the difference between me and all of us up here and someone who doesn't have the same type of worldview that we do. And it's opportunities, it's things like the Magellan, it's being able to study a different language, it's all sorts of opportunities like that. So I think you hit on a really smart point.
5 of you went to European Union countries. 2 of you to one that's on the process of getting out. Did you hear or see any manifestations of such a thing as a European citizen? I haven't heard anyone say anything about the European Union.
Yes. So I arrived in Britain June 26, 2016. It was 3 days right after the Brexit vote, and like my project was mainly public opinion based. I contacted the alumni office here at W&J, and they gave me names of people, former alums and friends of alumni who were living in England at the time. So to answer your question, I met with people, for example, from BlackRock, the financial services office in London, and they had mentioned, at least the individuals I spoke to, they had mentioned wanting to break away from the European Union. They didn't think it was beneficial toward them in a variety of ways, and they did not view themselves as this European citizen type.
I didn't have a lot of conversations about necessarily like the European citizen identity. I had a conversation though about Brexit with a couple of Scotsmen that were in my hostel, and it's not really anything too serious, but they told me that they hoped that Donald Trump would get elected so they didn't look like the most silly country anymore. And then they sent me a Facebook message afterwards apologizing whenever he was elected.
As far as my project goes, I went to study basically that, Donald Trump after his election. But I did have a couple talks about Brexit and about them pulling out of the European Union. Is that right? But the biggest conversation I had was with Louis Offer, and he was actually a student here. I met back up with him in London and talked to him about it. And basically, it split, as you probably know, it was split pretty heavily down the middle. And that was really the only time it was mentioned to me, because when I was there, they had the election for the new prime minister, that like special election. So that was really what mine was focused on. That was what the conversation was focused on. But a lot of people were very reserved about talking about that when there was two people who had different views on it, because it would get a little heated. But they were all about talking about Trump, President Trump.
So based on my experience in Germany, as we know, Germany kind of has to carry the European Union, Britain leaving, and they feel it's a responsibility to take charge. So the attitude in Germany towards Brexit was one of kind of, they don't really care, we're not worried, we're going to come on, we're Germans, we know what to do. And so I think that based on that attitude, and my experience also in England the summer before, with the Brexit vote, was kind of, nobody knew what was going on at that time. And so Germany feels that it's recoverable, but they're not very happy about the vote for Brexit. And as far as global citizens, or European citizens rather, I know I took a flight from London to Berlin, and I was really surprised that all people with British passports didn't get into the expedited line for European Union citizens. And surprised because they haven't left the union yet, but maybe they just don't see themselves in that line.
Before Harley says something different, I just want to comment on that. When I was there after the vote, and they were still allowed to go into the European Union line, and they chose not to. Well, some did, but the majority chose not to go for line, which I also found interesting. She just spoke right over about that.
Yeah, I was in the Netherlands as the, I guess, fervor was starting to ramp up about Brexit, and I talked to a couple of university students from the Hague University, and I found that a lot of them were really concerned. They weren't sure what was going to happen, if that was going to make a domino effect. They weren't sure if there were going to be catastrophic economic problems. So I think there was a lot of uncertainty and fear. As to your point about a European citizen, I definitely noticed that across the board. It seemed like that definitely is a second identity for a lot of these the people in the Netherlands. And you see just how they treated their leisure time. My Airbnb host kind of impulse visited Austria. And they just drove there, kind of just for a weekend. They told me they'd be gone. And some of the university students, they would go to Poland. And so they all kind of consider it like an intermingled, closely connected web. And I think that was really interesting to see just how freewheeling it was, and that they, considered it traveling to Poland or Austria in the same way that we consider traveling to Ohio or West Virginia.
Do you have any other questions? Just like to thank our student panelists. Oh, I'm sorry.
So in the United States, lately there's been a lot of talk about the importance of diversity in terms of ideas, perspectives, and people of different races and genders and religion participating in politics. While you were abroad, did you notice, especially in light of things like the isolationism of Brexit and heightened Islamophobia after terror attacks? Did you see shifts towards more openness to diversity and different ideas in the countries you visited, or the opposite, and why do you think that was?
I didn't notice much of a change in Spain after, the attacks in Paris and Brussels, which is what my project was mostly focused on. And I asked people why they didn't feel as much of like a panic, or if they didn't feel some sort of way about it. And they said that they were used to terrorism because there had been a great deal of domestic terrorism in Spain not long before that. So they didn't really associate terrorism with a religion or a race or anything like that. So.
Yeah, when I was on my project, the hostel I stayed in was between London Bridge and Borough Market. I left about an hour or two before to go to Paris, before the attacks. So I didn't know what happened until the day after when I had Wi-Fi. But going back to London, my mom and my family members were texting me saying like, I want you to just stay in Paris, because it was like a day or two that I just wanted to visit a friend. And I was very surprised at how just, how resilient really isn't the word, but just like almost unaffected the people were by that, is it was just almost like they just didn't want any of it to I guess, ruin their day. And I think that goes back to what Jordan says, it does happen more frequently there. But at the same time, they're a lot more diverse. At least London was a lot more diverse of a city than I've been used to. They had a Muslim mayor, and a lot of the there's a pretty, I don't know exactly what it was, but they had a pretty high population. And there's people in the streets saying that this is real Islam, handing out food right after the attack, just to I guess, make it a better perception to people. But I really didn't notice any difference, and that was fresh after 3-4 days after an attack.
Yeah, so not this Magellan in Germany, but the previous year I did Magellan in England and France. And while I was in London, there was an attack in Notre Dame in France, not the church, but a town outside of where a priest was stabbed. And even then, I know my family was really concerned. I'm in a different, I'm in England, I'm not even in France. So there was a panic, there seems to always be a panic here in the United States over any kind of terrorist attack. Whereas in London, they were like, oh, it's not a problem. So then when I went to Paris shortly thereafter, that was an eye-opening experience for sure, because it was shortly after a lot of major attacks in Paris. So obviously it was a security concern for me, but while I was there, it was a big shock that there would be groups of 3 or 4 armed soldiers walking around the city, and there was bag checks throughout the city. And does it make you feel safe? Maybe. Does it make you feel more unsafe? Maybe. But, so that's kind of how they deal with it. But also something that was odd about Paris is that I realized how undiverse the United States is in so many ways. When I arrived in Paris off of the Channel, and it was maybe sunset, about sundown, I was on a major boulevard shopping district, and people stopped in the middle of the sidewalk to pray. And I was like, I was completely floored. And this is something I've never experienced. Obviously there's Muslims here in the United States, but I don't see people praying on the sidewalk like that. So that was an eye-opening experience. And perhaps that helps the French people recover faster from terrorist attacks, because they see what everyday Islam is like instead of radical Islam. So again, like what Kate said, it's completely different. Diversity is different. Recovery is completely different.
I think that a big part of what makes Americans be able to, react in such an extreme way is that we aren't familiar, kind of like what Katie said. I remember talking about in my English class this past semester that the way that authors in Old British literature would make something scary is by not really giving it a lot of physical descriptions, by making it a mystery. And to us, people like Muslims, especially here in southwestern Pennsylvania, they're pretty much a mystery. And so it's really easy to vilify a person or an idea that we're not fully knowledgeable about or we haven't fully experienced.
Yeah, and also going back to what Abby said about terrorist attack happening in Israel and Hayden having an experience in London. I remember I had met with a fellow WNJ student in Paris, and we took different metros. We left the Eiffel Tower about midnight, and they texted me and said, "Oh my gosh, my train just got evacuated for suspicious package." You know, in my head, I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I'm panicked. I'm going straight home. Like, I can't imagine I was on that train." But I mean, it's just package. All I had to do was get off the train. You know, it wasn't a big deal.
I'll tell you about my experience. So I was in Jerusalem, and there was an attack at Temple Mount. It was a radical Palestinian attacked the guards. And I had actually planned to go on a tour of the old city later that day, but the tour company emailed me and said, "We're going to do it tomorrow instead." So I just kind of stayed in my Airbnb in like the little town part of the city we were in. But the next day we went, and there was armed guards, like in full body armor, standing, and Temple Mount itself was closed, but people were carrying on in the old city like everything was normal. There was tons of kids visiting the Western Mall and everything, like people were just carrying on with their normal lives. And then recently in Africa, it's a predominantly Muslim country, that was a big cultural shock for us, because like one day, our bus driver, we got off the bus to do something, and our bus driver stayed there, and when we came back, he was praying, and we were all just kind of like, what do we do now? Like, but it was sundown, and that's just what they do every day. That's their normal lifestyle. It was surprising for us, but thinking about it now, like what Katie said, it's very normal for them.
And I think just the fact that we all kind of pointed out these differences and like how weird it is for us to see how quickly other countries recover just shows that it's something that's so foreign to us, and that we're not used to it at all. So the fact that we've pointed out these things as being strange kind of shows how we deal with modern terrorism in the United States as well as other countries.
Any last questions? Okay. I'd like to thank our students here on the panel. Thank you all for joining us on our first day of the Symposium on Democracy. Thank you very much.